All right, episode 22 of the Guerilla Social Work Podcast. On today's episode,
the mighty Nita Bakke.
Bakke.
That was pretty good.
That is kind of a fun last name to say, right?
Yeah, it
Bakke. Yeah.
She's our resident jailhouse lady.
Jailhouse
This
rock.
is a Penitentiary Pundit episode, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That is Penitentiary Pundit.
Yep.
For sure. So, this episode is brought to you by Alpha Counseling and Treatment. We're one of the top-notch folks for dealing with justice-involved clients, plus any other mental health type of situation you got going on.
That's pretty good.
Any other mental health type situation?
Sold.
I'm sold.
Yeah, these ads are harder than it looks. Yeah.
Dude,
Yeah, they're funny.
That's a horrible ad.
I liked that actually, though. 'Cause that stands out.
It's like, have you ever watched those Tool videos, online where dudes are like crawling out of your nose and stuff? If that's happening, come to Alpha. We've got you, dog. And if you are a client, though, you will appreciate the outstanding quality and care you receive from any of the Alpha therapists. And
What if we do it like an infomercial, or if I'm like, Jeff, I've heard that when you go to other places, they're really mean to you and they make you feel bad about yourself. Is that what I'm going to get with Alpha Counseling?
Well, you'd be happy to learn that with Alpha Counseling, you'll get top-notch service delivered to you at a low price of,
And beyond judgment and labels and far beyond your criminal behavior, you are treated as a whole person at Alpha.
At only 3 easy payments.
Yeah. How do you find Alpha Counseling?
No, but seriously, go to utahsbesttherapy.com. You can find us on there. You can call us directly at 801-645-5455. We really are invested in any of our clients' satisfaction, but also their success. Number one objective is to have clients no longer involved in the criminal justice system. That's our primary objective, what we're trying to accomplish. So and we were trying to figure out the last time, without further ado. And these guys are saying, here we go. This ain't a Bud Light commercial, bro.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Not yet. It will be.
Here
You
it
just got
comes,
It's just short and
21.
sweet. So today we're talking about suicide with Nita Bakke, and enjoy.
No, that sucks.
Now
Mr.
we're recording.
Funny banter.
Now we're recording.
We're recording AF.
Do you not feel comfortable without a computer in front of you?
No, I'm
She
fine.
feels left out because we have.
Yeah,
We should get like
you get
flat
a-
screens on each wall. Too,
Did you get a
just
new
stuff playing.
computer?
we did.
What kind?
Adele.
Ooh, Dell.
You got an Adele computer?
Adele.
That's what I heard when she said
She
it.
just starts slanging
Adele.
computers now. Dude, it's like, I picture it's like awesome though. It's like the best computer that ever was invented. Dells are good though. I like Dells.
I like mine. I got this one after my other one died on me.
Yeah. Didn't you what did you used to have? Another Dell?
HP.
Oh yeah.
It was okay.
Dude, but the funny thing is when I get into arguments with like Mac people, because they're like, "Oh yeah, my Mac will outlast that Dell or that PC," but I'm like, that might be true, but I can buy like 5 PCs for the price of your one Mac, and I promise if I use those consecutively, there's no way.
Or Apple just purposely slow it down after 2 years.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
It's pretty hilarious.
Well, Jeff might leave apparently, right?
We'll see. For now, I'm here. 99% sure I'll be here, but
He's here.
yeah, if I leave, I leave.
Man, I don't think you should.
Okay.
I don't think you should. It's a myth.
Is that?
It's a myth that planes crash.
Okay. All right. I'm here then.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you guys were referencing the topic of suicide. Like,
No.
I always here for now, but if I leave, I leave.
No.
It's like some really
It's all vague.
awkward, dark intro.
I might not be here this weekend though.
No, just in case.
It's like a shitty role play. I'm trying to get you guys to talk me down. It's like, the listeners are really going to like this. Hey guys, I'm feeling sad.
Dark as hell.
What is it? What's going on?
We record it.
You have a family member doesn't want to fly a plane right now, and you're going to go fly it for them?
I'm going to go actually commandeer an aircraft.
That's cool.
Check the news tomorrow. Something cool will happen.
That's really weird. So, all right. Well, should we introduce our guest?
Yes, it's Thomas Montgomery.
Thomas, say
Tall, Hot
hello.
Blonde.
Thomas, say hello.
I was watching that in one of my groups last
hey.
week. I love that movie.
Dude, that is so... Yeah, Thomas Montgomery.
Yeah, have you seen that, Nita? Have you
Tall,
seen
Hot Blonde?
Tall Hot Blonde?
I have not.
That's a good documentary.
Oh, yeah. So this is the mighty Nita Bakke, right?
right.
Here in action. Yeah, this is the second time recording.
It is.
The
We're
first
doing a
time-
redo.
Yeah, a redo.
Redux.
REDUX. Yeah.
The truth is, we just didn't want Brett.
Yeah,
in here
Brett
with
Hoxer
me.
is
Brett
awful.
Hoxer is the worst guest.
It would have been a nightmare for everyone listening because we didn't have enough microphones, so they were trading it off. It was just
Yeah.
so yeah, it was a
We've
We're doing
covered
a
this
redo.
before. Brett, we will get you on here. We love you. Just
Yeah.
not today, bro.
not soon. but we
Hashtag
will.
Hoxer for life. Yeah. You've never seen Tall Hot Blonde?
No.
Oh, man.
That's awesome.
It's beautiful. It's one of those.
It's like the ultimate catfish,
The best.
online thing, but we can't ruin it. So if you haven't seen it, there's a mega twist in there.
Well, wait, you just did ruin it right there.
No.
By saying there was a twist, you ruined
Yeah.
it.
No,
It's
there's
like when I'm watching a
there's
fight.
multiple twists on that thing.
Oh, there are multiple twists.
yeah.
Like when you think something's up, then although
Because because for a while you're like, oh, that's messed up. Then you're like, holy shit.
yeah. The problem is when you watch it now. So like anybody watching this, there's a documentary called Tall Hot Blonde, but then there's a shitty Lifetime movie, like all of them for that matter. but you get the Lifetime movie, but the documentary is way better.
Oh, yeah,
I
that's
think.
awesome.
Yeah, I watched the Lifetime movie. I was like, oh, this is horrible. Yeah, like do you ever watch a Lifetime movie, Nita?
I have, but not very often.
Oh, you get together with your girls
More like my mom.
and you guys, oh yeah, let's get some ice cream, 1 gallon each. And
Oh, yeah.
Nita
And then we
is
go into a
way-
pillow fight.
My mom used to watch those. I always sit there with her just all depressed. Like, these
Yep.
are, one as a kid, I'm like, these are horrible.
yeah, but that is pretty nuts. That the thing is back, you can see the technology back then when that was
yeah.
going on totally makes sense. But nowadays everybody's pretty hip to it. So usually you're like, there's somebody's kind of like, well, this is probably what's going on or whatever. I use that if you watched it, I use it to do a cost benefit analysis, like a decision matrix, and do some and then go throughout the whole thing. And then kind of see what's going to happen next. So I pause it at strategic moments, and then
You have the group go through a decision matrix while you're watching it.
yeah, that's where I use it. Then
I could see that. Sure.
Better than what I do. I just show the whole thing at the end. I'm like, that's crazy, huh? All right,
Don't
you
let
guys
that
have a good week.
dude, that's like when you show that interview with Ted Bundy. About the pornography, and at the end, no, that's why you don't watch porn. See ya. So stupid. It's the worst approach. But we're not talking about porn tonight. What are we talking about tonight, Nita?
You tell me.
Suicide, baby. Yeah. Nita's our suicide expert. Talking people out of it, not talking them into it.
Correct.
It's very critical that we got that.
I might need to definitely clarify that one.
That's what you're doing, right? Just to follow up.
I think, didn't you get the best interview of all time in Alpha's history? Like, first question in an interview, Jeff said, hey, how do you feel about working with completely naked people? Was that the very first question in your interview?
No, that wasn't from the interview. That was after I took the job, driving from Minnesota to Utah, in the middle of nowhere. And Jeff calls and goes, hey, Adam just got done shadowing at the jail. How are you going to feel if you talk to someone who's practically naked? And then just kind of left it at that.
Like you brought up Adam
don't even
first.
have
And then he hangs up on her.
Dude, we have yet to even cut Nita a paycheck. The whole reason she works for us is solely off of looking at dongs. Just all the
Yeah.
naked dudes and all the
Naked dudes, naked women,
Yeah.
naked
all of the above.
Everything.
naked everything.
Well, explain that a little bit. So, because it's not, so anybody listening to this, it's not like our clients are just regularly naked. There's a purpose to this. So,
There's a purpose to them being naked.
yes, there actually is.
It's part of their treatment plan.
Will remain naked for at least 72 hours. Yeah. Anyway, so what's your official title with us?
Oh, man.
Do you even
I
have
just
one?
say
The clinical supervisor of the Weber County Correctional Facility, mental health, acute mental health.
The acute mental health clinical supervisor of Weber County Correctional Facility.
Boom,
yeah,
son.
something like
CSW.
that. I let Adam
Hi.
make up my title when he did the business cards. So
He just mashed in a bunch of keys.
Mainly, you basically hold it down at the jail.
ACMHLISCH.
yes.
And you do a lot of things well beyond the scope of what we originally hired you on for. And you're kind of
Yes.
a badass. But
Hey, thanks.
the bulk, so I mean, this is going to be a penitentiary pundit podcast, but
Ooh, that's good alliteration right there.
penitentiary pundit podcast. I guess your specific area of maybe, I mean, I don't know if expertise is the word, but you certainly have dealt with way more suicidal folks than probably anybody else here at Alpha. And so you're at least our expert on it. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. It's an area that it's pretty shaky. You know, I'm sure every one of us have been afflicted or touched by suicide in one aspect or another. And it's something that people that I'm friends with that are listeners of this podcast have wanted us to talk about. And I was pretty excited when you first did this podcast. So it's a long time coming. There's a lot of people that are waiting to hear from you. So don't screw this up.
That's
Try
right.
not to.
Okay.
Yeah, didn't Cameron Haynes ask you about this?
Cameron Haynes asked me about it. Yeah, he famed bow hunter Cameron Haynes. He did a 5K. The Keep Hammering 5K was a couple months ago, and I went out there and did it and bumped into him after the race. I think I told this on a previous podcast, but it's worth mentioning again just because he's a pretty cool guy. He threw a 5K or put on a 5K, and quite a few people showed up, and he was at the finish line, high-fiving, taking pictures with everybody that came through. Pretty cool. Well, that wasn't, I don't think, the expectation, but I chatted him up a little bit afterwards, and he was asking my advice on, like, he said, like, I've had fans reach out to me and just start opening up, people I've never met, and asking me for advice on suicide and like how to help with that. And he was saying, like, what do I say? Like, I don't want to make it worse. So, I had about 10 minutes with the dude as we were walking from the finish line to where they were doing like this raffle thing. And I kind of I shared a little bit about what we're going to go in today, but I kind of just cut through some of the myths that exist about suicide and what to do and what not to do. And, well, I guess long story short, it's something that I think everybody is kind of universally aware of because it really just sucks to lose somebody like that. And we are charged with the care of a lot of different people that are locked up. So a lot of families out there are depending on us to be able to help their family member through some of the roughest patches of their life. You know, they're locked up, they're in jail, they don't know what consequences they're going to be facing. Who knows the myriad of problems that they're experiencing, emotional or otherwise. And we catch them at their dark moments. And what we do, is, I don't know, it's important for those, I think for the families out there that have people locked up to know how we're addressing it and what we're doing, and that we're not just turning a blind eye to it.
Right.
So, Nita, I don't know exactly what the best jumping off point is, but maybe you could just talk about just a brief overview or an outline of like what a day goes like for you and how you come across to people that are suicidal anyway. Like, how do you come across these folks?
Well, to kind of backtrack, so what I do for Alpha is I'm the full-time therapist at the Weber County Jail. So me being there as much as I am, I'm dealing with more clients than not who are suicidal. So those are going to be the clients that are either on suicide watch or even any client that we do come across who could be at risk of that. And that's kind of how I start my morning.
And how are they determining? So like I'm throwing questions up there like that we might know in this room, but I know listeners don't know. So how do people get put on suicide
So kind of how
watch?
they're identified in the jail?
I'm booked into the jail. I come in there for whatever, and they decide, so this goes back to the reason why, they're actually naked too, which probably is, we've addressed that a couple times. We said that a couple times. So we're trying to say, okay, well, why is that? Somebody comes into the jail, they're booked in.
Right.
What are some determining factors as to why they would be then put into the suicide watch?
Right. So the booking staff at the jail are going to be their first point of contact when they are obviously booked into jail. So they have their own assessment that they do. They ask questions to kind of see what's going on with the client. So any substance abuse, if they've had any recent losses, they will even just ask if they've had any suicide thoughts, ideations, kind of trying to figure out if they are at risk. Based off of a scoring system is how they do it. So either they can score like an 8-hour watch where booking staff is going to keep a close eye on them for 8 hours, see if they're doing okay before sending them to housing, which even if they score an 8-hour watch, they're going to be scheduled for mental health either way. So they'll still have contact with the mental health professionals at the jail. Mm-hmm. And then if they score a full watch, they would be put on suicide watch.
Okay.
And to kind of explain suicide watch would be they're going to be in a cell that's in medical, so they're closely observed by booking staff and nursing staff, making sure that they are safe. They're not going to be a risk towards themselves, but they're also going to be stripped out too. So they will be in what we call a suicide smock, and they'll get a suicide blanket. So it's something that they can't easily manipulate to harm themselves, and then they can't have anything else in the cell with them either. So no pencils, paper, they can't even have a book. So really they don't have anything. So they want to reduce the amount of risk possible while they're on suicide watch. And then they will have to meet with a mental health provider before they can be cleared from suicide watch.
Okay. And that's your primary function too then, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you said some words in there. I just want to make sure, or some language in there I wanted to make sure that we addressed. Sure. So like when a client, you said suicidal ideation, right? So right. I think a part of this is anybody listening to this, whether they're a therapist or if they're a family member or even a client for that matter, I think recognizing some of the types of suicidal behaviors and some of the suicidal thoughts is kind of critical. So can you explain suicidal ideation, what that is, kind of what that means?
Sure. So kind of looking at a client and figuring out what kind of suicide ideation they're having, we would be asking questions such as, have you had any thoughts where you wish you were dead or could go to sleep and never wake up, or any actual thoughts of killing yourself? So we're trying to figure out, do they have any of those suicidal thoughts that are causing a risk towards themselves?
So you're starting out with the thoughts, and if they're answering in the affirmative to those things, then where do we go? Well,
but they happen on a continuum though too, right? In terms of their severity. Because, so I mean, if anybody, one of the things that we kind of talk about there is all of us have had fleeting thoughts at one point or another, like, oh, I wish I was dead, and like, but it kind of comes and goes. But then there's some of those persistent and highly specific considerations, which are the ones that we tend to focus in on a little bit more, the suicidal ideation.
Where kind of the risk assessment comes in too. So, which I'm having a hard time remembering what I talked about in the last podcast and trying to remember this, but
just pretend it never happened.
I'm trying.
Just forget about that time in your life.
It was awful. It was
pretty rough.
It was a hard day.
Yeah.
Real quick, for 5 points, can you say what the actual CSSRS acronym stands for?
Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale.
Oh, yeah.
Boom, son.
Oh, yeah. I've been practicing that ever since you guys told me I was going to be on the podcast.
Oh, really?
Oh, hell yeah.
All right.
Taking a shower. Okay, what does it stand for?
So you got 5 points. Good job.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So you've looked into thoughts, and again, what are your initial opening up screening thoughts again? Roundabout.
So from the risk assessment?
Yeah.
So the first thing you would ever ask is, do you have any thoughts where you wish you were dead or could go to sleep and never wake up? There you go. And then the second one's going to be, have you had actual thoughts of killing yourself?
Okay. So you want to cover both the continuums there.
Correct.
In terms of like, okay, if I have had thoughts of like, oh, okay, well, the world might be a better place if I just go to sleep and never wake up type situations, but I'm not necessarily making any plans at that point. Okay.
Yeah.
And so plans, so this is another thing that we look for, right? I mean, if a client has then confirmed that they have had actual thoughts of killing themselves, we kick it up a notch and ask maybe how they might go about that. What's the significance of a suicide plan versus just thoughts about doing it?
So a plan's going to put them at higher risk just because they have gone further along with the thought process. They're starting to come up with actual ideas of how would they attempt suicide. And then again, jumping ahead, it's going to go into intention. So if they have intentions of acting on those plans, that's going to make them that much higher of risk to harm themselves. So if somebody's starting to come up with details as to this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to do it, and this is when I'm going to do it, that's going to put them at the highest risk because they've already had, they have the suicidal thoughts, they have a plan in place that they've thought about, they have a time frame as when they're going to do it, so that puts them at the highest risk.
And does it matter, like, I mean, again, it seems like there would be a spectrum there. So on the one hand, I might say, okay, have you had any thoughts on how you might go about doing this, right? And a client says, well, I'm just going to hold my breath until I die. Okay. It's probably not, I mean.
Right.
Gonna work.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not very realistic. Right. Versus, if they are very specific and they have something that maybe they've even rehearsed and thought about, and it's like you can tell the lethality behind it is pretty significant. But it's not just because I utter a plan that might be unrealistic that now I'm imminently at risk in some of these things.
So, like, for example, I had a client the other day who said, yep, my idea is I'm going to go jump into traffic. Okay, you're in jail. That's not really something you can do right now. So kind of figuring out, do they actually have a method and availability to that method to be able to act on it?
Okay.
That makes sense.
It does. Because I think when we were looking at that one time and trying to address lethality alone, I thought was relatively ineffective. In other words, like if it's a house or something like that, you can take like guns out of the house or anything like that. But if somebody is kind of like if they're have made up their mind and they're set on this, they're going to find alternative methods. I mean, the lethality alone is not. But I mean, if they are having more lethal thoughts, then clearly that's something that you ought to key in on and pay attention to. Was that right? What did we?
Well, I'm remembering when you and I kind of developed that program for the other place we worked, and kind of the traditional suicide watch protocol was to take the shoelaces out of their shoes and like razor blades, take the razor blades so they couldn't shave.
If anything, it just made it seem like really uncomfortable, right?
In terms of what's effective or not effective, addressing lethality is a losing battle because again, where there's a will, there's a way. So it's kind of just making it uncomfortable. So yeah, lethality alone isn't really the, and by the way, Nita, I had this, I have it pulled up while you're going along and you're batting 100 right now. So good job. 1,000, I guess is the batting 1,000. It's obviously concerning if a client says that they have a plan in place, but intent's the scariest, right? Yeah. I've had a client before say, I thought about it before, and if I was going to do it, I'd shoot myself if I have a gun. So, my spidey senses are tingling at that point because that's not good to hear. But then that same client said, but my life's awesome. I've got way too many people that love me. There's no way I'm going to do it. Just if I was going to.
So identifying protective factors.
There you go. So that's what you're maybe kind of looking for in their language is identifying protective factors. Protective meaning protecting against suicide, factors that would limit the risk of them successfully following through. So what are some of the protective factors you look at? What are the things? Just a few.
A few of them. So
things that keep someone from hurting themselves.
The big ones that they have us ask about is if you are able to identify reasons for living. So that kind of gives it an open statement for them to identify whatever they want to live for. That's kind of at least how I ask it. If they have a supportive network or supportive family, if they have religious beliefs. So if they think that suicide's immoral or against their religion. Let's see.
If they haven't watched all the seasons of Breaking Bad yet.
Oh, yeah.
That is a good reason to live.
Yeah. Employment and education is important, too. That's another one that we ask. And then if they have a sense of responsibility towards others.
Are people pretty good about coming out with that? Or just someone, if they seem more legit, like on the intent side of suicidal, is it pretty tough for them? Like, if you say, hey, what reasons do you have to live? Sometimes do they seem pretty stumped on that one?
Sometimes it totally depends on the client.
It kind of depends on their mood, right? A lot of these guys are coming into jail, and the last thing they want to do is even be talking to you. And so when you're trying to get them to process reason to live, they're more likely to tell you to screw off.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on how open they are with you, how comfortable they feel, if they're willing to discuss those things. But then, it just depends on how much of a conversation you're willing to have with them, too. So kind of backtracking, when we do these assessments, we have the full risk assessment, which is a lot longer, and kind of like we were talking about, it's going to talk about, you know, their suicide ideation, if they're having an intent or a plan, but then it goes further into it too, where we kind of skipped over this stuff too, that how many actual attempts have they had, were they ever interrupted, aborted attempts. So the risk assessment builds on itself to us to get to a point where then we are able to talk about those protective factors. And then once we've gotten to that point, I feel like I've built enough of a rapport with them that I can ask those things and start pulling it out of them, I guess.
Because it's not no, that makes a lot of sense because I mean, we were just talking about we were talking about suicidal intent and the intent. I think that would obviously signal like a high and acute risk for suicidal behavior at this point. And so if they're drafting a suicide note or taking precautions against discovery, those are, you know, the preparation stuff. I think those are pretty critical, but it's weird because you deal with such a diversity of clients because you have a handful of clients that unfortunately, are simply manipulating housing requirements when they come to the jail. Correct. So they know the things they need to tell you in order to be placed on suicide watch, but that's a huge waste of resources. Correct. Because those cells are, you know, obviously you have to be, they're in front of view of everybody. Everybody can see them. And then, you know, those are for the highest risk individuals, not for just people who are trying to sleep away something.
Yeah. There's only 6 cells in medical and those are used both for people on suicide watch and medical watch. So when there's, you know, numerous people on both, it makes it really difficult because they have to then house people in booking, or there's times that there's multiple people in a cell that are on suicide watch, and you know, people kind of joke that it's like sardines, but in all reality, it is when there's 4 people in a cell because there's just not enough space. But then, you know, you're spot on. People manipulate to try and get what they want within the jail, which kind of sucks. Well, I know we have to deal with it.
And I know that that's a myth. You know, like one of those myths that they say, well, somebody who's talking about it, you know, they're not going to do it. I know that's a myth, but I'm for anybody listening, I'm telling you, there are people who don't want to be housed in like population in the jail. And you have to, I think about what that would look like as to, I mean, going into jail, being terrified of what was going on, or perhaps you're worried about your own safety going back there. A lot of people tell us exactly what we need to hear in order to be worried about this. But then we have some tough decisions to make because we're like, okay, well, wait a minute. And so this is where there's an elegant process to this, because it's not simple. Because the other spectrum of this is people who are legit suicidal, but know, you know, that they don't want to go up there. And so then they're telling you the opposite. They're telling you everyththing's fine. And you have to pay attention to other things that are going on that would suggest, because it's not as simple as, okay, so have you been thinking about this? Yep. You have any plans? Yep, I do. Okay. You had any intent? Yep. Oh, okay. Well, let's go ahead and put you in there. It doesn't always, I'd say that's probably the exception and not the rule. And in fact, somebody who's suicidal may be manipulating to be in housing. So they're doing the exact opposite of some of those things. Or there's somebody who's in the middle, but they don't want to tell you the wrong things because they think, oh God, if I tell her those words, they're going to throw me in the turtle suit. And then I'm going to have to go up there in medical. And they don't want to, so they're, oh no, I'm not telling you those things, because if I say that, I'll go up to, you know, immediately.
Right. And that's something that, okay, so the risk assessment that we use, it's spelled out for us, but I don't ever follow it to a T. So it's a lot of prompt questions to get the conversation started, to see what's going on with them. But a lot of times I have things that I add in that help with it, or, you know, like you said, if they're manipulating and they know what to say, I'm going to be paying attention to a lot more than just those questions. I'm going to be paying attention to their body language. You know, how are they talking to me? You know, even eye contact, if they're looking at me when we're talking, all those different things that could be presenting that aren't within what they're saying to me. So I could have someone say, yep, I'm totally fine, but they're slouched in their chair and they're not making eye contact and they're really despondent and
they have a recent attempt.
Correct.
Right. Stuff like that you're looking for.
Yep. So if that's the case, they could tell me everything that's right and technically score a low risk based off of what they're telling me. But then that's where you said I kind of have that, you know, uncomfortable moment where I have to make a decision that, okay, do I go off of what they're telling me or what I'm observing?
You know, I was gonna, you know, Mace was referring, I think he used the phrase, you know, it's elegant. And it, you know, it's a combination of this standardized CSSRS assessment, along with your abilities as a clinician, your judgment, kind of your experience, what you've seen, the feeling you're getting from the person. You know, Mace mentioned like an indicator. You mentioned body language. Mace mentioned an indicator being a recent suicide attempt. You know, and
which is sometimes hard if they don't disclose that information.
Right. So. I mean, and also collateral data as well.
Correct.
I'm trying to figure out exactly what I can share here. I was meeting with a lady that was on suicide watch not too long ago.
Why she got to be a lady, dude?
Because she was.
Yeah. I am strictly gender binary for today's conversation. Yeah. And she was on suicide watch, and when I was talking to her, she was saying, yeah, the guards overreacted. They said that I was choking myself. You know, I was just trying to get some attention. I wasn't really trying to do it. I was trying to cause a reaction. I'm not suicidal at all. And so, and Nita, you know what I'm talking about here. And I remember. I was on the way to putting the ball into motion to clear her. But before doing that, one of the most important steps that we do is we talk to the officer that works in classifications. I won't go into too much detail, but they decide where to house the inmate that we're clearing from suicide watch.
Right.
So I talked to that officer saying, hey, here's what's up. What do you know about? And he'd said, well, actually, when she had been choking herself, her face had turned purple. It was really quite serious. And so, okay, you know, that entirely changed my approach with her, right? Because she was saying, I'm fine. It was just an attempt. And maybe her intention really was just to draw attention to herself, but she was really quite successful in that. And it could have been lights out if someone hadn't gotten to her before she had asphyxiated.
Well, not only that, I think the flip side of that, if you do, like Mace was saying, like it's a cry for attention, just all their attention seeking, and you err on the side of that, and then the person really kills themselves.
Dude.
Yeah. Not the side you want to err on.
Cannot do it. Yeah. No way.
Yeah.
That's why if I do feel, so we've all had people. So, okay. So I guess for listeners, Justin's had a little bit of experience in the jail. He's helped us out with some assessments, but he hasn't done quite as much legwork with the people on suicide watch. But like Justin, I'm telling you, man, that you'll know people are lying to you and they're telling you they're suicidal when they're almost decidedly not. They're just trying to manipulate housing. But man, you know what? Like if it's inconvenient to have them in medical, but it means that I'm not, you know, potentially putting this dude at risk, I'll err on the side of caution all day. You know, I'll let him manipulate me. Yep, you got one over on me. Good job, bro.
Yeah. It only becomes really a problem when there's so many people up there that, there's really no room to do, pretty much of anything. And it's not a matter of we're getting frustrated or it's inconvenient. It's like, okay, if medical is completely empty and he has his own cell and he wants to lay there and sleep and be naked all day, more power to him. Right. Whatever. But if there's people that are legit high risk and maybe they're also psychotic and, like it's almost a risk to them. So then we're like, okay, how am I going to act in the client's best interest here? Even though he's telling me these things that I suspect he's, we use a term called malingering. In other words, he's feigning or exaggerating symptoms to, get a favorable result for them. Because for a lot of folks, it seems weird. And this is something to just understand about and maybe have some empathy of saying, okay, what would it take if I was what would be the mindset need to be in order for me to want to be up in front of everybody? And they're not completely, they're naked under the smock, but, they be up there uncomfortable, sitting in this, in this cell, nothing to do, nowhere to go, nobody to talk to, stuff like that. Like, what would it take to get there? So I legitimately have some sympathy for them. Right. But man, oh man, it just puts us in a crazy position. Those are some bad decisions sometimes. Like, I don't know.
I know. I try to ignore the pressure to make things run smoother at the job. I'm pretty good at getting to the bottom of it and helping dudes get clear, but I have to be really be aware that ultimately my job is to make sure these people live, right. And if that means that sometimes the people in classifications think I'm soft. All right.
Yeah. So I think anybody listening to this, particularly like a therapist, you can't simply use the risk assessment tool, because that risk assessment tool, I mean, it's not like there's a, yep, you use this and the client's going to be safe. I mean, you're using this to guide your clinical judgment. So you can't just say, have you ever had thoughts of dying or going to sleep and never waking up? Like, just, not trying to...
It even says it right there.
Yeah, what does it say? This scale is intended to be used by individuals who have received training in its administration. The questions contained in the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale are suggested probes. Ultimately, they're suggested to be pro bono. Ultimately, the determination of the presence of suicidal ideation or behavior depends on the judgment of the individual administering the scale. So ultimately, it's like, hey, this is a really good scale. You should use it, but it doesn't mean anything now.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it is, I think, an excellent tool, and I like how it builds on itself, because it does kind of give us this. But I think there's a finesse and there's a style that goes along with this that can't be understated. And this is where simply asking the questions, I do think you need to be direct with a client. This is being very important that you're paying attention to this, because a lot of people don't want to talk about suicide. Somebody brings it up. Hey man, I mean, I don't know.
What's that thing you're saying? You don't want to feel like, oh, I'm going to say the wrong thing and I'm going to make them do it. So it's almost just like, I'd rather avoid the conversation where odds are you're really not going to say one thing where they're going to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to do it now.
Well, it's a social taboo for sure.
Yeah.
But if I just, hey man, I'm thinking about like, I don't want to live lately, like, I don't know, did you catch that Chargers game?
Oh, that sucks, dude. Don't do it.
That's what I was hoping you guys could actually talk about, too, is, for people listening to this, like, what do you do when you have somebody in your personal life that's suicidal, or what should people know that maybe have a uncle or brother, or a dad or mom, whatever that's suicidal in their personal life? How would you approach it if you're not a clinical professional?
I would say, what are the methods you use right now to talk to those people who have, because I feel like if you had a relationship, they might be more willing to talk to you, but when people don't have any relationship, what is some simple methods that you use to get this out of them? Maybe it's not so simple, because I mean, you're kind of a wizard when it comes to this stuff, but
only kind of.
Only kind of. Yeah.
Better than me. I'm like, hey, you're going to kill yourself? All right.
Why? Well, time's up.
Well, I got to go.
Need a help.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
I mean, I don't know. I'm looking at your face. It looks like, I mean, do you have something? Well,
yeah. So the big thing is just trying to break down the stigma of it. So that's the biggest thing of all. So even, someone's on suicide watch, I'm going to talk to them like they're any other person. I'm not going to have any judgments towards them. So that's the big thing, is that, hey, we're going to talk about this. I know it's uncomfortable, but let's get through it together, and, we'll figure out what's going to be the best plan for you.
That's an important piece.
Yep. So I usually have some kind of opening, or even if they're not on suicide watch, because we have to do a screener with any client we meet with. We have to just find out if they have any suicide ideation present. And a lot of times when it's, hey, the first time I've ever met with somebody and I go, hey, I got to ask you these questions, and I know it's going to be uncomfortable, but, the more honest you are with me, the better I can help you. And I'll ask those questions. And even if I go all the way through the 3 main questions you have to ask, and they say, yep, I'm fine, usually I'll give a disclosure saying, so the reason I asked this is because I want to make sure that you're getting the best care that you're going to receive while you're at Weber County. I know there's a lot of stigma to it. You don't want to talk about it. But just so you know, if you just answer yes to those first 2 questions, that doesn't guarantee you're going to be put on suicide watch. Because anytime I had a client who has been really uneasy with those questions, that's kind of their first thought is, hey, if I answer yes to I have death wishes, or yes to I have thoughts of killing myself, then I'm going to be stripped out. I'm not going to be able to go to housing, and all my rights are going to be taken away.
That's a big one. I run into that with my outpatient guys, where sometimes if going back to the finesse side of things, like if you can tell something's off, usually the approach I do, and I think it's something you can do in your personal life, is like, say, if you are, it's okay. Like, it's okay. Like, just like May said, that we all have these thoughts or something along the lines somewhere. Because I've had plenty of guys that will, kind of ease into that. And then as soon as I'm just to the point now where I've learned that just flat out, if I pick that, I'm like, hey, are you suicidal? And you just like, well, don't tell my PO. Don't say anything to my PO. I don't want to get in trouble.
Right.
Like, they'll literally think they're going to get in trouble or go back because they're suicidal. And I'm like, dude, it's okay to talk about it. Like, if you are.
So in a way,
it's all right. We just talk.
normalize it,
Yeah, you just talk about it. But yeah, that's a big one where they think they're going to get in trouble. Or that it's bad. Like,
Oh, yeah, I've
now you're
had
not
it-
doing good in therapy if you told me you're suicidal. Yeah.
Yep. Or people think that's going to make it so I lose my good time at the jail and maybe can't get out sooner. Or, you know, there's a lot of, I guess, myths or misconceptions that happen at the jail that people don't understand. And so I try and educate them the best I can. So if it's the first time ever being asked those questions and I'm doing an intake, I'll say, hey, I got asked this every time. Clients usually get pretty used to that and they'll just tell me without me even having to ask. But I usually find out, hey, let me know what's going on, because then that way I can better help you. And then they're way more open to talking to me about it because they know I'm not going to be, you know, overreacting and say, oh, you wish you're dead one day. So, okay, you got to go down to medical.
Well, I think there's an aspect too, especially if it's like someone trying to help like a loved one, where a lot of times where there's a lot of shame that comes along with that, people don't want to say, hey, I feel suicidal. They might really feel that way. But sometimes you open the door if you're just direct, like, hey, I'm kind of worried about you. Are you suicidal? They might actually be honest because you've opened the door a little bit.
Well, what you're referencing is you're being honest.
Yeah.
So I think when you're honest and upfront about what your role is, what your intention is, you're not beating around the bush. You give them the information that they need to make a decision. That honesty is reciprocated. I mean, another piece that I don't know can't necessarily be trained is, I mean, and I hate to pull out like therapy nonsense, but you definitely demonstrate a lot of empathy and concern for them. I mean, it's pretty clear in your tone of voice and your body language and that you are definitely, you give them time, you're responsive to, distress that they're having, things like this, that you genuinely care for what's going on with that person in that moment. And that's one of those things you either care for them or you don't. Like, this is where I think if you just are going into this and like, oh God, I hate working with these pieces of shit. Here we go. Like, you're not going to be able to pull that off. Like, because you can't fake that. That's not a quality to be trained. This is something that I think this is probably this person's lowest point in their life, and you're working with them. And yeah, they've probably done something horrible to be in there, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve an ounce of compassion at that moment to try to get them through this, which I think you do really well. That's where you can kind of get them through those things. And I think that, along with the honesty, helps them open up quite a bit more.
One of the biggest things I try and focus on with them too is that transparency. So I know I've talked to you about it, Jeff, that, anytime I have someone on watch, I'm telling them what they're going to expect, when they're going to meet with me again, whatever decision I make too, I have them 100% involved in my decision. So even if
what's the intent there? Why are you involving them in that and letting them know each step of the way?
To reduce their stress. I think it'd be way more stressful, hey, I met with a therapist and I don't really know what's going on. I'm back in the cell. I have no idea if I'm cleared or not cleared from suicide watch,
right.
Or not knowing I'm getting put on suicide watch and a therapist making a decision, talking to the jail staff, and then all of a sudden I'm getting stripped out and I have no idea why.
Probably gives them a semblance of control too.
Yeah.
I mean, they can't stop it from happening, but if I know it's coming, I can at least prepare for it a little bit better.
Being an inmate must feel like absolute chaos. And then if you, like, especially if it's your first time getting locked up, and then if you're stacking mental health issues and substance abuse issues, plus maybe I want to die on top of it. Yeah, I think that's a solid approach. And when I want to circle back to what Justin was saying, you were talking about how you will just straight up ask them, hey, I'm worried about you. Are you feeling suicidal? You're not hiding from the word suicide. I think people, another myth I think that people have is that, if I talk about suicide with this person I'm worried about, it might drive them towards doing it.
Give them the idea. Like, they never thought about that. And you're like, are you feeling suicidal? Oh, yeah.
Good point.
I could do that.
That might be nice.
Yeah.
Right.
But like when you don't address it directly or beat around the bush, it's easier for the client to be like, oh, I'm fine. And then kind of Mace gave the example, like, hey, did you catch that Chargers game? I mean, it gets, especially like in our professional life, it's.
Maybe that's why they're feeling suicidal. They watch the Chargers game.
That's a good point.
Yeah, if I was a Chargers fan.
Yeah. Sorry, San Diego. Is it San Diego anymore?
Yeah.
It's probably Las Vegas now or something.
I don't even know
Raiders.
I don't know anything about the
Well,
NBA.
It's probably Rancho Cucamonga.
It's the Rancho Cucamonga
The Morgan Chargers.
It's the Morgan.
Well, Jeff, I know what you were talking about as far as the aspect of there's some people you just know. Because when I was doing residential before this, there would be, so I was working with adolescent females, and there would sometimes be the ones where right around bedtime, I feel suicidal, and you're like, okay, go to bed though. Like you,
Right.
Or you would use it. It's almost like, I don't know that this happens in the jail, but not necessarily punishment's not the word. Deterrent, like someone that would throw that out all the time, so there'd be like attention seeking. They throw it out. I'm like, okay, let's go sit down. We got to do the assessment. And they're like, oh no, like you'd purposely run them through the ringer as far as like suicide precautions, so they don't keep saying, oh, I'm suicidal. No,
that does happen at the jail. So anytime too, when like a client decides to make a suicidal threat or something like that, when they're getting booked in, because hey, I'm not getting booked in fast enough, or they're getting impatient and they say something like, well, I just want to kill myself. Then, they're going to act on it, and they're going to say, hey, you said what you said, and we're going to, put you where you need to go based off of that comment. And a lot of times it is just that. They made a stupid comment. They didn't mean anything.
Which obviously, you got to know that person very well. Like, just the first time you're meeting someone, they say that. You can't just say, oh, he's probably faking it.
And so I don't blame jail staff whatsoever. They're going to 100% try and stay within liability. And if that's going to happen, we're going to play on side of precaution, and we're going to do what we need to. And guess what? You go talk to mental health. And then, all of it gets put on us. But that's what we're there for.
Yeah, but we signed on for that. If I was... they have that luxury, I think, and it's a controlled environment. And at that point, they may not be trained, and maybe they don't want to be trained in addressing these things. Yeah. I'm just trying to collect a little bit of information from you ahead of time to assess, what's going to happen while you're in here, and then you say those statements. Okay, now you've cued me enough that I'm just going to refer you. So it's kind of layers. I think that's helpful for the client, to be honest. Imagine a world without booking where they didn't do that. Everybody would come in mental health, because they would. So I think that's a useful layer, but they're not going to be able to do those things. But I do think that if I'm worried about my friends, you do have to be comfortable and competent in talking about those things. And obviously being direct, but increasing your knowledge about suicidal, about suicide is really important too. Knowing, I think some of the circumstances in which people become suicidal, how suicidality manifests itself, what are the warning signs that might indicate some of this stuff, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about, what questions to ask. And I'm not suggesting that a member of the general public now become a suicide, assessor. I don't think that. I think you know when now I might need to call for, assistance or help this person arrange for that. And then go from there, because it can be an uncomfortable topic. Because what was that? Was that 3 I's that we talked about?
Interminable, inescapable, intolerable.
So never ending, I can't escape, and I can't tolerate it. There's no situation that actually exists that's like that. But I think if you're noticing some of those feelings coming from a person, this is never ending, I can't get away from it, and I can't tolerate it. Like you're starting to go down that path. Those are some things to kind of pay attention to as we move this forward.
That's probably as far as for the general public, that might be the easiest approach for them to keep in mind. So again, just to, at the risk of getting repetitive with what Mace is talking about, the idea is that the 3 I's of suicide, the way we used to teach it, if a situation, again, Mace said that no such situation actually exists, that it'll never end. You can't escape it and you can't take it. Usually there's going to be a timeline to these things. Granted, like some pretty rough shit can happen in your life, but you'll probably be able to work through it maybe, But, if such a situation were to exist, let's think about that. If you're listening to this, think about a situation that it was so painful, you could not tolerate it. There was no getting away from it, no matter what you wanted to do, and it would never end. Like, I would probably for sure kill myself.
That's basically like Auschwitz, right?
Yeah.
That's about it.
Yeah, Auschwitz, and there's no hope of getting out, and you're constantly getting, it feels that way, I think, to a lot of people that end up completing suicide. And so if you're listening to this and you can find an out to try to help the your friend work through. If you can see that, well, there is an end to this. It's not interminable. There's a termination date on the pain you're experiencing, or it's tough to tell people that they can tolerate the pain they're going through. That's a tough sell. But typically you can work on either the inescapable or the interminable side of things. And if you can help your friend or loved one see that there's an end to the suffering, or maybe there's additional options or routes to get through it, that you might be able to help them work through it. And then I also think that contracting for safety is important. We haven't talked about that yet, but we do it at the jail. Nita, so we can talk about how we contract for safety at the jail, the protocol when we clear somebody from suicide watch, but also,
right.
And then circle back around to what do you do with a loved one, and how do you contract for safety, and what does a safety contract look like with like a brother or something? So to clear someone so once you've decided, okay, yep, this person seems to be good to go, what kinds of things are you doing in a safety plan, Nita?
So in a safety plan, we are going to ask them, give them a heads up of what the red flags are. So I can just recite it.
Do it.
Okay. So red flags would be, now that I just said that.
Prolonged depression and helplessness.
Bitch.
Yeah, I know. Just because I was like, yeah, I can do that. Okay, so if you're having any prolonged depression, feeling hopeless, feeling worthless, any sudden changes in your mood, if you're having suicidal statements, giving away prized possessions, with the jail, I usually explain that too. So
feeling trapped,
within
which is
the
funny
jail,
for people
though,
locked up.
but like, giving away prized possessions, normally on the outs, we would say, in the community, we would say that's something. There's my jail talk coming. Yeah. But we would say something like getting rid of family heirlooms, things that are important to you.
Loss of penis.
Or if they like watching Airheads.
Yeah,
Exactly. But in the jail, that'd be something like someone getting rid of all their commissary for no reason.
Did you say watching Airheads? That movie with Brendan Fraser.
That movie's awesome. Yeah, Adam Sandler, Brendan Fraser. Yeah.
What an awful movie.
That movie's awesome.
Oh my gosh, dude! Like when you finally, it's like that reminds me.
Chris Farley was in that too.
He was, dude.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, because you're like, oh, are they ever gonna play their music so I can hear how killer it is? And then they play, and you're like, oh my god, this is a horrible.
The Lone Rangers. Yeah, that was their name. Yeah.
Anyway,
that was very pertinent.
Watch that movie
on the outs. We
don't
watched
wanna
that
live
movie.
anymore.
Yeah, got to add that to the safety plan. Watching Airheads.
Watch Airheads twice a day.
So if a client were to I acknowledge, okay, yeah, I've got some of those red flags that need to talk about.
Right.
What are they supposed to do when they're in jail? What are they agreeing to do?
You're cutting me off before I was done with the whole thing.
Yeah,
He's just helping. He's like John Stockton.
He's like, just jump ahead.
It's the assist.
yeah.
Well, because the other red flags we're going to be looking at too is any change in mood. So if they're doing things out of the ordinary, feeling trapped, no reason to live, making final arrangements, or feeling like a burden.
Or if they're making funeral arrangements.
That might be a problem.
For themselves?
For you?
That might be a red flag. So we're going to have them be aware of those things. We also give them some material for them to work on to help them with anything that's going on. So, crisis management plan, alternative thoughts and actions. So if they're having dark or distressing thoughts, helps them work through that. And then a commitment to life contract. So that brings back the protective factors for them, reminding themselves what are they wanting to live for? What are they looking forward to? What's important to them within their life?
So these are just some cognitive behavioral therapy interventions to,
Yep.
kind of move.
So again, it's helping them move along. And then
what are you laughing at?
Suicide's so funny. No, just what Jeff said. They're making funeral arrangements for you. Just threatening you. Oh, sorry, I lost
hey,
it.
it has happened.
Yeah, they're all. I called Levitt's mortuary. Your coffin is ready. Or what?
10 a.m. tomorrow.
So then lastly, if they do feel like they are at risk, they're going to notify, a jail staff, medical staff. They can press the intercom button if they need to. A lot of times officers don't want to do that, or sorry, not officers, but inmates don't want to do that because there's the stigma to pressing the button. You know, you don't want to be a button presser.
But we can usually talk them into at least like submitting a request to talk to us again.
Yeah, so usually I'll tell them that if, hey, you're not comfortable talking to them, make sure that you're reaching out to mental health so we can get you in. But anytime someone's cleared from suicide watch, we always schedule them the following day anyway. And I usually explain that to them that, hey, we want to make sure you're doing well in housing, so please come back to follow up with us so we can make sure you're doing well.
Awesome rundown. And so in our own lives, or I guess for loved ones, I don't know what you guys do. I luckily haven't had very many opportunities to do this in my personal life, but I basically said, hey, can you guarantee you're going to call me if you start going down this path again? And, you know, with like personal friends, I've done that, and that seemed to have worked out.
Why does that work, do you think?
I think it's huge just to have somebody talk to you and express that they care about you and that they want to follow up with you. Like that's huge to hear, because so if I'm reaching out to you, if you're my buddy, and I say,
Which I am.
yeah, if I say something vaguely related to suicidality, and then you change the subject or start talking about something else because you're uncomfortable talking about it, doesn't necessarily mean that you don't really care for me. But I mean, how am I going
Definitely
to interpret?
sends that signal.
Right.
Yeah.
My way to interpret that is, oh, okay, so I just talked to my pal. I was reaching out for help. I threw something out there, you know, and then he just neglected it and changed the subject. Well, that's confirmation that I ought to go through with this, you know, because that's a lot of us aren't willing to accept this idea that, I mean, I can't really wrap my head around suicide anyway. I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
You love yourself too much.
That's right. But, but I mean, I'm just saying, I don't, like, I don't know. I've always thought really weird about it. Cause I'm like, I always think like, okay, well, yeah, you're killing yourself, but you're also a murderer too. Like you're killing somebody. I know
Is that what stops you?
No, I'm fine with murdering people. I just don't want to murder me. It seems like
You're fine with murdering people?
Yeah. I mean, No, I'm not fine with murdering people.
Especially not you.
Very liberal.
Yeah.
Just especially not you.
I'm saying I don't really understand. I've never, of course I've thought about like, man, it'd be nice if, you know, if I wasn't here or something, like if I had to deal with this right now. Of course, we've all had those thoughts. Like I don't want to be dealing with this right now, and I don't want to, you know, have to deal with this tomorrow either. So, you know, we've had those thoughts before. Not necessarily I want to kill myself. I'm saying to the person who's there, it makes perfect sense to them. And so if you can't make sense of it, that's fine. But it's not you. You have to accept that it makes perfect sense to them to be able to at least help them and assist them at that point.
There's like a fine line with that too. You can't be like too nonchalant about it, like blow it off, but then also I don't think it's overly helpful to freak out. Like if someone hints at that, like, oh my God, are you serious? And like scare them out of talking about it.
I think this is the biggest pitfall for therapists. I think like, if they're faced with a suicidal client, I've seen this happen a lot when they become like the suicide police, you know, like they aggressively question and demand assurances that you're going to be safe, you know, sign this. Dude, that doesn't help. That doesn't help at all. That's sometimes like when clients, like when therapists somehow turn into investigators and like mass probing questions to get clients in trouble, like, you know, like they have to report. I'm like, you don't do that. That's not what you do. That's not your job as a therapist, you know, but
it's when we drift a little too close to the line of forgetting our role.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's super harmful stuff. Also, so Nita, like at the start of this podcast, she brought up that, you know, one of the protective factors might be, you know, if you have a religious client, you know, maybe suicides against their religion. And like, again, if you have the finesse as a therapist to kind of figure out a way to work that in a way that doesn't shame the client, by all means, you have to be careful though. I have a friend that went through this process, and he said that this lead psychiatrist guy, that knew that he was LDS, told him, well, if you follow through with it, you know, you're going to hell, right? And that didn't sit well with him. And, you know, he left treatment, and, I mean, luckily thus far there's a happily ever after. He didn't follow through with it, but he said that he was shocked at being guilted by the lead psychiatrist at this place that he was into, you know, you're going to hell if you do it, right? I mean, I know what that psychiatrist was trying to do, you know, he was trying to work with the protective factor, but was, kind of bull in a shine shop type
Well,
thing.
wasn't being objective about it.
No, and came off like a dick. Honestly.
Well, yeah, because you're thinking like in that sense, if your client's not religious, you're like, okay, I'll accept that because it doesn't exist, or just locking them further into like, I tend to think of like things along suicidal lines, like anxiety. So if all of a sudden you're holding hell over somebody's head, that's probably not going to really encourage them to talk about anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, have some freaking couth, man.
Or even, or just like, your life's not that bad. Oh, it's not that bad. Just totally minimize what they're going through.
Or leverage like things about, like, if you leverage about like how that might affect other people. God, you know how selfish that is. You know how other people would feel if you did that.
Step away from doing that.
I mean, if I walked up to you and I said, "Hey, my arm's broken," your first question to me would be what?
What'd you do? How'd you do it? Can I help you?
Yeah, like where does it hurt?
Yeah.
Like not, oh my God, you're wasting my time, you loser. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so, and again, I just think that speaks to a level of discomfort with suicide.
Well, no, yeah, the selfish side of that is usually one that gets me when people talk about that. Because I think in a lot of cases where people are suicidal, I think they've legitimately convinced themselves people won't care. Like them being here is a burden. So I think a lot of times you could actually argue the opposite. That actually, they're not thinking selfishly. They're more thinking of other people. I mean, their thinking's off, but I think they've convinced themselves no one is going to care, or they're even better off.
They feel like they're too much of a burden.
Yeah.
Telling them they're selfish it's not helpful.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. They're almost always, I mean, in training, they always say that clients who are suicidal are ambivalent about living or not living. They're somewhere in the middle. They're like, so they're almost wishing both to die and live is typical of most individuals who are suicidal. So there's wiggle room, and giving.
It's great news.
Well, yeah, like doing everything you can do to support the side of the client that wants to live, but not trivializing or ignoring the signs of wanting to die either. You can't diminish that and say, well, that's stupid. Why are you thinking that way? They'll call me stupid. This is a legitimate thing I've considered, and you're calling it dumb. Like you're just,
like when they minimize it by like, oh, well, it could be worse. You're like, I want to kill myself. Things could be worse. Like, I don't know. It doesn't really get much worse than that.
So the things people say in an attempt to be helpful.
Yeah, it's not malicious. They're trying to help. I think that's the trick, is going back, like how to help someone is just realize you don't have to have an exact answer. You don't have to have an exact thing that's going to snap them out of it. Probably no one will in that exact moment. Just talk to them about it. Hear what's going on. Find out if just like you're saying with the probing questions, if it's serious enough, then maybe they do need help right away.
Right.
But you don't have to have an answer. It's just like if someone comes up and they say, "Hey, my best friend just died." That gut reaction is like, well, I've got to say something to make them feel better. You're not going to say anything to make that person feel better. Right. Sometimes it is just like, oh, that sucks. I'm sorry. That's awful.
Just listening, right?
Yeah. Or validating them.
Yeah.
Validating them that your emotion that you're experiencing right now and your thoughts right now, like those are perfectly reasonable for the situation that you're in. Like it's understandable that you feel like complete shit right now, and that's totally okay. It's okay that you feel this way like that.
Yeah, why wouldn't you? Right.
And that's the whole thing. I mean, if you look at it seems like acute suicidality is a pretty transient state. Even people who are like super high risk if you did a ratio of times when they're not suicidal compared to when they are suicidal, it's way more not suicidal.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a temporary thing if you just invest some time and energy into this person. And it can't be predicted with any degree of certainty. I mean, but you can. I think the risk assessment stuff and these type of questions are useful. It at least shows a person that you care enough to care about them, and that could help them with the ambivalence of some of those things. And lightening it up a little bit.
Right, just opens up for the conversation and makes it easier. And something I would say to professionals, if they ever do get, certified in that, where they use the, suicide risk assessment, that you don't have to follow it. So I think a lot of therapists get really rigid and they try and ask every single question, and there's no breaking that. And it's okay to just stop it. Like there's so many times I will start an assessment and I'm not going anywhere, or the client I can tell isn't, wanting to talk to me about it, and I'll just end it and then just let them talk. So a lot of times I'm just a soundboard where, okay, let's see what's going on, and we'll just talk about it. And I totally get rid of the assessment altogether.
And that's you using your finesse as a therapist to realize kind of when to make that switch. But if a listener does want to get better at assessing this stuff, one more time with what the CSSRS stands for, another 5 points on the line.
Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale.
There you go.
Right. And if you go, and anybody, it's free to the public, actually. You guys can...
There's an online course that you can do.
Yeah. It's about 20 minutes. I think it's worth anybody's time. You could just go to, it's cssrs.columbia, columbia.edu/training. And if you go there, they have there's an interactive training module. In other words, you have to it asks you questions that you have to answer and then kind of move forward. And you get a little certificate or something like that. To the degree that you want to do that, I don't know if you necessarily need a certificate. What is important though is I think that walks you through and shows you exactly kind of how this plays out. I mean, and again, it's kind of, if you watch it, it seems kind of cheesy in some ways, but again, I mean, dealing with this is...
Sometimes it just is.
Yeah. Well, it's just like suicide contracts that we do. I think the coaching and talking to them is way better. I mean, a suicide contract, it's not like they're... Okay, so I signed this and then I'm bound by what? I mean, by Scientology to not do this ever again? I'll not commit suicide.
You definitely can't get out of that contract.
For 4 billion years.
It's the process of doing it, right?
Yeah.
The fact
symbolic.
Nothing against Scientology. Yeah.
Symbolic.
Yeah, it's symbolic, but the other thing is there is a CYA component for us that I've went over this and at least I've given them this and I'm having them sign this. And so as a mental health therapist, I think we do need to do that. I would say if you're in a personal relationship with another person, I'd use that sparingly, if at all. I don't know if that's even recommended. I mean, there's a CYA component to it for us, not because we think something's going to happen, but because we want there to be evidence that we've went over this with the person. We've given them some simple methods to try to, thinking methods, try to work through some of these issues. And then they have a copy of that to be able to work through this. So there's a plan in place to follow. So it's not a contract. It's more like a plan. We made a plan and they're signing it. So I guess it's not really a contract. It's just more like they've signed a safety plan for us. They made a commitment to signing the safety plan. It's not about signing your name, right?
It's powerful.
That's right. Yeah.
So how often do you do this daily, Nita? Like suicide assessments? That like each day that you go in? Like how often are you talking with people that are either suicidal or being assessed for it?
Originally, it was every day, so 5 days out of the week.
So that's a lot.
Yeah, and the big part of that was consistency. Helped to get to know the clients. They weren't being bounced around from therapist to therapist. Again, if they are manipulating, anything like that, I'm going to be more aware of that compared to if they are going from one therapist to another. Now I don't do that as much. A little bit more of the other therapists see them too, so... it's usually 3 or 4 days out of the week I'll still do that.
How do you do as far as not letting that get to you too much? Because I know for me, where I don't deal with it as often, can be a little rattling to deal with that. And I think especially newer therapists, that's pretty freaky. So if you're dealing with it pretty frequently, what would you recommend as someone getting into that or that's interested in that, like on how to hold a boundary, how to not let that get to you too much? Because I'd imagine that can be pretty emotionally taxing.
A lot of times I trust in what I'm doing. So kind of dotting my I's, crossing my T's, knowing that I'm following the protocol.
That's a great answer.
Yeah.
Have faith in
So
the process.
liability is a really big thing. So Jeff kind of touched on it earlier when he was talking about the client that he found out talking to the jail staff were maybe at higher risk than they were. I don't try and base my decision just off of the client. So collateral data, I'll review any incident reports that are in the jail system, talk to the, jail staff beforehand and then talk to the client. So that way I'm getting a full picture as to what's going on and I'm not just making a unilateral decision. That helps make me feel a little bit better about it. I staff it with other therapists too, if I ever do feel uncomfortable. And then, common term, I guess, self-care. I know how to just deal with it.
Drinking.
Yeah,
That's your
every
self-care.
day.
Water is good. Yeah. I think what you said there is probably a really big aspect of that, just that you're following the protocol, crossing your T's, dotting your I's. Because I know when I first started with Alpha, and I had a few of those where I was just let it rattle me, and I freaked out, and so I'm asking for feedback. And like I can remember a specific situation where I was really pretty worried about the guy, but then I was like in the back of my head, I was like, hey, you probably won't do anything. But then I staffed it, and I was like, no, you need to call 911. And I really didn't want to. But then on the flip side, I get to leave knowing, well, I did what I need to do, and not out of a cover your ass thing, but like, I know he's being taken care of, followed up with me, as opposed to the flip side would just be, well, I hope he doesn't do anything, and then that can be on your mind longer, and then God forbid something happens, and you're left with, I should have done more.
So, and I'm pretty systematic as how I do it too, to make sure I don't miss anything. So I kind of have a step-by-step process that I just follow every time. So when I'm meeting with a client, usually I don't just jump right to the risk assessment. So I usually am going to obtain any information that I need prior to that, and then the risk assessment. And once I'm done with that and decide if I'm clearing them or not, then I go to the safety plan. Yeah. And so I have a way of doing it that makes sure that I'm doing everything I'm supposed to. And that helps a ton. But I've had situations where I did all of that and it didn't turn out for the best. I've had clients who have attempted and, having to know that I did what.
And that's a weird aspect too. It maybe sounds a little morbid. Like, obviously I don't want to go off the end of it like, well, if they're going to do it, they're going to do it. But to some level, you can only do so much. So you can only follow protocol so much or show enough interest. You can't watch them 24/7, especially if it is like an outpatient kind of thing of, I don't know. I think we always doubt ourselves. Like, if something does happen, like, what could I have done differently? And we can always improve. But there is a level of, I can only do so much.
And that's ran through my head plenty of times when people have, gone to housing, they did try something. Oh crap, what could I have done differently? And then I usually go back through my head and nope, I did everything I needed to. Shit happens.
Yeah. Well, no, that assessment itself is like crucial, because I never want to be in a mindset that, they're going to, all this is great, but if somebody really wants to do it, they're going to do it. That's like exactly the mindset you want to stay away from, right?
Yeah, because that'll show.
You want to stay away from that. And I think what you're saying is really good. If somebody does something, you have to ask yourself, okay, did I miss anything? And be willing to have the humility to accept that you did. I mean, and I think as a therapist, if I made every attempt at covering, like the bases and trying to help this client through, and something happens, well, that's horrible and tragic. And even if I did make a mistake, well, that's a learning opportunity that I get to grow from. I mean, it's unfortunate if that becomes a fatal learning opportunity, but that's, this is why they call it a practice, folks. It's a therapeutic practice. It's not, there's no 100% science to this stuff. We're dealing with some really difficult people that are pretty down and out in their lives. This is not easy by any stretch of the imagination. So, I mean, even, there's been a lot of criticism for the jail in terms of how they manage some of those things. And I think that everybody there is 100% invested in those clients and keeping them safe, especially you. And there is only, sometimes, unfortunately, the reasons that they're there and their mental status at the time and what's going on with them is so, so degraded that there's not a whole lot that we can do. I mean, if they're psychotic and unresponsive, they're not even paying, we can't even have a conversation with them. I mean, I don't know what.
So that goes back to the naked people.
Yeah. It always comes back to the naked people.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Nita, that's why I really dig your answer when Justin said, how do you keep it together? And I forget exactly what you said, but you essentially said, trust in the process that you're doing. And, we have this, it's a standardized process along with allowing you the flexibility to exercise your clinical judgment. And you have a routine that you do every single time. Like, I can't imagine a better approach to something as, tough to track and like as tangential a topic as a suicidal client from who knows what walk of life. So again, I think that's a great approach.
Thanks.
Yeah. And in the community, there is a 24-hour crisis hotline number, 1-800-273-TALK. So they have trained professionals on the other end of that somebody can call and talk to. I think if if you get to a point where you feel super uncomfortable with this, you then can say, hey, why don't we call this number together? I think having a companion doing one of these things, talking to somebody who's a little bit more trained in this is probably a good idea. The nearest hospital or emergency department, obviously also a good idea. Trying to get them into a counselor is probably pretty good. Any of those things for anybody who's listening to this. And then, of course, anybody who is having these thoughts, or questioning some of these things ought to be able to, call those too, or reach out to us and ask for.
What's that number again?
1-800-273-TALK. They're trying to turn it into like a 3-digit number. I don't think they've done that yet though.
Like a 911.
That'd be a good idea.
Yeah, like simpler, for some of those things. So,
Nita, do you have anything else you want to enlighten us with?
I don't think so. Unless there's anything else you guys want to know.
How do you feel about this time, comparatively compared to last time? You feeling good about this one? Have you represented yourself well? Have we not made a fool out of you?
I think I did all right.
last time she
Just
said,
all right. We're good.
Yeah.
last time she said her hair didn't look good, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Still
I'm
doesn't.
So worried about that.
Yeah. What's your favorite part in that Airheads movie? Just before we leave,
What's your favorite prequel to Predator? What's
Like on a pound for pound
Have
you
basis,
seen
what's your
Airheads?
favorite Predator movie?
That's about what I was just gonna say. I don't think I've seen.
Oh my
either.
god, that is an awesome movie.
you got to remember how young she is, dude. Yeah.
Do I have to remember that?
Not at all.
Yeah. Suppose you don't have to remember that.
How old are you?
26.
26.
She's a
you
whole
can still know
generation
Airheads
below us.
though.
No, she's
No.
I'm saying you could. I'm not saying you
should have
should.
been
You
like
could, but I was like when I was playing from Pee-wee's Big Adventure, like the breakfast scene. That
You've
song.
seen Pee-wee's though, right?
No.
What?
I was playing that with Aaron, and I was like, "Remember this, guys?"
for Ragnar,
and me and
huh?
Aaron, me and Aaron were like, "Hell yeah!" And then everybody else was like in the car, like, "What the? What are you guys listening to?"
we were like, how old were we? She was like a toddler when we were watching those things.
She wasn't even a thought.
You weren't even considered.
You weren't even that considerate back then.
You were so
You
inconsiderate.
were super inconsiderate.
So what, you'd have been like, what, 3 years old when because it came out in 94?
3 years old and rude as hell.
3 years old and awesome.
super inconsiderate.
Super inconsistent.
Thanks for coming on.
You're welcome.
Insult you. You need to watch Airheads though.
Yeah.
No,
but that's probably one
That's
of
not
those
what we're
ones.
closing with. You need to watch Airheads.
Everyone's got to watch Airheads.
No, it's not that good of a movie.
It's pretty good.
It's awful.
yeah, it's not that great, dude.
It's pretty good.
It's not anything worth
I'm
watching.
sticking by it. It's got 3 out of 5 stars.
Justin does not speak on behalf of
What's it got on Rotten
Guerilla Social
Tomatoes?
Work Podcast.
Maybe it's really good.
Yeah, what is
Please
it?
watch it.
What is it on Rotten Tomatoes?
It's probably not even on there. It's so good.
No, it's on there.
don't
It's
know.
like the Shaolin monk of movies.
Dude, that's got a lot of good people in it, though. I was just looking that up.
I know it's got a lot of good people, but
So
it
it's
doesn't-
good.
No. It's not how it works.
Ocean's 13 wasn't good either, and there was a lot of people in that.
Yeah, that's true.
See, I thought it was pretty good.
Ocean's 11 was awesome.
Oh, that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Should we wrap this up?
I don't
Yes.
know.
Okay. Thanks for coming on, Ms. Bakke.
Yep.
Alrighty, that does it for episode 22 of the Guerilla Social Work Podcast. Want to thank you for tuning in. We hope you got some good information out of that. We also would like to thank Nita for coming on the show, talking about a pretty difficult topic. She did an awesome job with that. And we are going to be back on the next episode of the Guerilla Social Work Podcast, and we will be guestless on this one. This will be me, Jeff, and Mace. We're going to be talking about how does one have compassion for themselves. So self-compassion. We will be back on that episode, and we hope to see you then.